Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player of all time. A legend on the ice, a national icon, and a name synonymous with greatness. So when the Great One stepped behind the bench for the Phoenix Coyotes, expectations were sky high. But what followed was a chaotic, confusing, and ultimately disappointing chapter in hockey history. From baffling roster decisions to gambling scandals and bankrupt ownership, Gretzky's time in the desert was anything but successful. This is the story of how the GOAT stumbled into the NHL's hottest market, and why greatness on the ice doesn't always translate behind the bench. When he retired in 1999, Gretzky had amassed a fortune from his wages, endorsements, and business ventures. He had more than enough money to buy a stake in an NHL franchise, and he chose the Phoenix Coyotes. Not the greatest investment on paper, as the Coyotes had never turned a profit after moving from Winnipeg. The hope in Phoenix was that Gretzky's expertise would lead them out of the red financially through sustained on-ice success. That's why he was named alternate governor, managing partner, and head of hockey operations. There was never any indication that he would become the coach. In 2000, when he was asked about which role he wanted in the organization, he said, "One thing I am certain on is it couldn't possibly be coaching. Coaching in hockey is a curious art. The better players who go into coaching can't understand how come their players can't see the game the same way they do." Put a pin in this quote and save it for later. In May of 2005, when the lockout was still dragging on, rumors began to swirl surrounding Gretzky's role with the Coyotes. By July, it became clear that the announcement was imminent, and on August the 9th, Gretzky was finally introduced as head coach. Personal reasons were why it took so long for this announcement. Gretzky's mother Phyllis was back home in Brantford dealing with lung cancer. In Phoenix, the question was how would Gretzky perform as a rookie head coach? The sense is you can't be a good coach because you were a great athlete. I kind of think I wasn't naturally gifted with size and speed. Everything I did in hockey I worked for, and that's the way I'll be as a coach. Others weren't so optimistic, and for good reason. The only coaching experience Gretzky had was with his son's Little League team, where he magically discovered a passion for coaching. Others saw this as a marketing ploy by the Coyotes, hoping Gretzky's star power would help sell some tickets. Ultimately, the people are going to watch the players, and the players are the guys that people pay to see, said Gretzky. Let's take a look at some of the players fans were paying to see. Shane Doan, Mike Comrie, Ladislav Nagy, and a 41-year-old Brett Hull. Hull was actually excited about playing under Gretzky, his former Blues teammate. He said, "I don't think Wayne can yell. He's so calm and level and in control, and I don't know if you've ever heard him, but he doesn't have the loudest, most boisterous voice." Gretzky was going to need to hire some assistants to do the yelling for him. He was joined by none other than Rick Tocchet, Rick Bowness, and Barry Smith. Smith was in charge of tactics. Bowness ran the D and PK, and Tocchet was entrusted with the forward group. Armed with a new coaching staff, there was real hope in the organization that things would turn around. But as you're going to see in part 2, you can't survive in the desert on just hope alone. If you're enjoying this video so far, please drop a like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 25,000 in 2025, and I can do it with your help. Thank you. Gretzky's rookie year as an NHL head coach is honestly worth a 30 for 30 documentary. I don't have the budget of ESPN, but I'll try my best to do it justice. Gretzky opened his coaching career with a 3-2 loss against the Canucks. The next night in LA, his coaching staff's inexperience manifested itself through some serious incompetence. They were already missing forwards Peter Nedved and Ladislav Nagy. The Coyotes lineup was further depleted when Frederick Schuström was pulled from the game 5 minutes in. There was a lot of confusion. What just happened? Why did the refs take him out of the game? Turns out, the assistant coaches listed him as a scratch under the roster sheet, rendering him unable to play. This wasn't directly Gretzky's fault, but he was responsible for signing off on the game sheet. He did take accountability, however, saying it was inexcusable and his responsibility. Never mind who was responsible. This was a tough start to Gretzky's tenure. On the ice, the Coyotes were not very good. They couldn't score. In the first month of the season, they barely averaged 2 goals a game, surprising for 2 reasons. 1, their coach was the greatest goal scorer in history to that point, and 2, scoring post-lockout was up almost 30%. To make matters worse, Brett Hull had nothing left in the tank and retired after just 5 games. Shane Doan couldn't do everything by himself, and the Coyotes' most dynamic forward Ladislav Nagy missed 31 games. The only reason this team wasn't consistently getting blown out every night was because of a 38-year-old Curtis Joseph, who was holding it down in the crease. The 2 MVPs that I've seen in the game at this point would be Jagr in the East and Joseph in the West, said Gretzky. Halfway through the year, Joseph was a legit Vezina contender and his play had the Coyotes fighting for the final playoff spot. Gretzky wasn't just coaching. When he was behind the bench, he was also scouting for Team Canada. He was the executive director of the Olympic team. The preliminary roster had 81 names on it. Gretzky had bitten off more than he could chew, having to focus on the Coyotes and the national team. Unfortunately for Gretzky, things took a turn for the worse away from the ice. In December, he had to take an indefinite leave to attend to his dying mother. Just 3 weeks after that, he lost his grandmother. His presence was missed in Phoenix. Shane Doan said it was different not having him around and the leaders in the room had to step up. Gretzky showed strength and courage through this ordeal. 9 days after his mother passed away, he returned to take control of the Coyotes and Team Canada. A month later, as Canada was about to embark on their Olympic journey, a bombshell was dropped on the hockey world. Rick Tocchet was accused of being the chief financier behind a multi-million-dollar sports gambling ring. To be clear, he was never accused of betting on or fixing hockey games, but his clients were reportedly NHL players, owners, and Gretzky's wife, Janet. Tocchet was charged with promoting gambling, money laundering, and conspiracy. This criminal investigation was led by New Jersey State Police, and it was called Operation Slapshot. Gretzky and Tocchet were not just co-workers, they had a long history as friends. They played together at the Canada Cup and on the LA Kings in the mid-90s. Everyone in the world is innocent until proven guilty. He's a great guy and a good friend. He's just going through a tough time right now, said Gretzky. When asked about his wife placing bets, he said, "Oh really? I don't know. You'd have to ask her about it." Bettman came out and tried to pour water on the fire, saying the NHL was conducting its own investigation. He made this statement while he was in Las Vegas. Oh, the irony. This scandal rocked the NHL and there were questions about Gretzky's involvement. Was he at risk of losing his job? How much did he know? But more importantly, did he place any bets? If I had made one bet, I would have quit the Coyotes. I would never embarrass the team or the organization. If I had made one bet, I would have quit Team Canada. I would never embarrass them. Gretzky was caught on wiretap talking about the operation with Tocchet, but he was never formally charged. His wife Janet, however, was placing big bets. According to the Star Ledger paper in New Jersey, she was making $500,000 bets on certain games, and even bet on the coin toss at the Super Bowl. To clarify, she was never formally charged but did appear in front of a grand jury. As for Tocchet, he took a leave of absence from the NHL and a year later pleaded guilty to conspiracy and promoting gambling. He was given 2 years of probation. He could have spent 5 years in jail, but the state showed him leniency because he was a first-time offender. I want to get back to Gretzky because this video is about him as a coach. But if you want to see a full-length feature on Operation Slapshot, comment down below. The Olympics couldn't come at a better time for Gretzky, but instead of providing him relief, they compounded his issues. Canada struggled in the round-robin portion and he had to face the Russians in the quarterfinal. A Todd Bertuzzi penalty led to Ovechkin scoring the game winner. Canada was done. Afterwards, none of the blame seemed to fall on the players. It was placed firmly on the shoulders of Gretzky. He made a ton of questionable roster decisions. Whereas the Russians trusted their youth, Gretzky didn't, leaving Crosby and Eric Stahl back home. When he returned to Phoenix in March, the Coyotes were in turmoil. Joseph's early season heroics faded and the team was undisciplined, ranking second in penalty minutes. The scoring woes remained. In fact, their top scorer Shane Doan didn't even crack the league's top 50. The team finished last in the division and 12th in the conference with 81 points. There was no guarantee at the end of the season of Gretzky returning as coach. But in the summer, he received a 5-year extension. By the way, he was making $8.5 million a year to coach. He was the highest paid coach in the league, and he did nothing to deserve this. In his second season as coach, the Coyotes finished dead last in the West with just 67 points. Some of this probably had to do with losing Rick Tocchet, but Gretzky's third and fourth seasons were nothing special either. They finished with 83 and 79 points before Gretzky finally resigned. Because there was no way the Coyotes were going to fire the Great One, who also happened to be the part owner. His reputation took a massive hit in Arizona. A poll was conducted asking Coyotes fans if they thought he should return as coach. A whopping 60% of respondents said no. How did it go so wrong? Why was he such a terrible coach? Before we get to part 3, make sure to subscribe. Hindsight is 2020, but it's quite obvious today that Gretzky was destined to fail. For one, he had no prior coaching experience. Not in junior, not in college, and not in the AHL. Like I mentioned earlier, his only coaching experience was with his son's baseball team. This should have immediately raised red flags. He couldn't lean on his assistants either, as they didn't know how to fill out a game sheet or stay out of legal trouble. Reason number 2. Gretzky had way too many roles in the organization. Owner, alternate governor, coach, and behind the scenes he was probably an assistant GM. Combined with his Team Canada duties, these were just too many hats to wear. Reason 3. He didn't do himself any favors in these positions. He was poor at talent evaluation. He didn't add any impactful players. Instead, he targeted overpriced and past their prime veterans, like Brett Hull, Owen Nolan, and Jeremy Roenick. He didn't realize where the game was going. The dead puck era was over, scoring was up, and there was an emphasis on speed, skill, but most importantly, youth. The game had passed him by and he couldn't adapt. This leads me to reason number 4. Tactically, he was inept. The Coyotes had decent players, but they didn't have a clear identity under Gretzky. Right after he left, the Coyotes immediately became one of the best teams in the West. Dave Tippett realized the strength of the team was its defense. They weren't going to outscore anyone, so they relied on Brizgalov to carry them back to the playoffs. This shocking turnaround showed how out of his depth Gretzky was as a coach. Which leads me to reason number 5. Great players don't always make great coaches. What made Gretzky special as a player wasn't his size or speed. It was his hockey IQ and vision. That isn't something you can just magically teach your players, even if you're just a skills coach. When he explained concept to his players, he was doing it from the perspective of a guy with almost 3,000 career points. How do you expect a team with Shane Doan as its leading scorer to see the game the same way? It just doesn't work. But it wasn't entirely Gretzky's fault. Reason number 6, the Coyotes themselves. They were losing tens of millions of dollars off the ice and expected Gretzky to turn things around while negotiating a sale. It didn't make any sense that the team was losing tens of millions and Gretzky was getting paid $8.5 million. So he's partly to blame for this financial mess. When you're the owner of a failing business, it's probably not wise to cut yourself a massive check. The ownership instability impacted every aspect of the organization, including management. Mike Barnett and Don Maloney couldn't provide Gretzky with the pieces he needed, whether it was through the draft or free agency. Also, this wasn't a team that was spending to the cap. And like I said earlier, Gretzky was involved in recruitment, so he can't pass the blame up the ladder. Or down the ladder, I guess, because he was also part owner. So there you have it, the crazy story of Gretzky's tenure as Coyotes coach. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.